last-minute shake-up at 5:30 a.m., laundry situation not good. And when your focus is on helping your clients, it's easy to forget about yourself. But NASM knows trainers.
Morning, Ryan. It's okay.
And staying in front of the day isn't always as simple as 1, 2, 3. So when the unexpected has you pressing pause,
what's the latest on creatine?
I'm going to get back to you on that.
let NASM1 help you press play. Visit NASM.org to sign up for a membership today.
You're listening to the Peak Physique Podcast with Andre Adams on the NASM Podcast Network.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the NASM Peak Physique Podcast. I'm your host, Andre Adams, NASM Master Trainer and IFBB Physique Olympian. Today, we are going to break down building bikini champions. I've got a very special guest who we'll introduce in just a moment here. And, we'll be bringing on this special guest who, you might be able to guess him, is founder of Team Atlas and has built an extremely successful team and brand as one of the most highly recognized IFBB Pro Bikini teams in the industry, with 109 pro cards and 32 Olympia qualifications to date. Today, I'm going to welcome to the Peak Physique Podcast for the first time, my buddy, James Ayotte.
Hey guys, how's it going? How are you, Andre?
Good. Welcome to the show, James. It's good that, we're finally able to sit down and catch up. I know we've got a lot of awesome things we're going to talk about today. And one of those things will definitely be sharing maybe your backstory to our audience, and then also breaking down what that competition prep framework and what those strategies look like for building those bikini pro champions.
Sounds like a good plan to me.
All right. Well, James, I think one thing that stood out to me, the first time you and I kind of chatted is your own personal journey, right? When we look at your weight loss story, tell me about that. Tell me about where you started at and what was the mindset, what triggered you to go through that weight loss and, get to where you're at today.
Yeah. So I've been an entrepreneur all my life. I'm 32 right now. I'll be 33 in June. And I've been an entrepreneur since I was 16 years old. So I started my first company when I was 16 years old. And it was an online services company. And during that business endeavor, I was on my computer, 15, 16, 17, 18 hours a day, just focusing on work. And, I was putting my health and, my body on the back burner and was focused on making money and building that business when I was young. And I gained a lot of weight. I ended up getting to about 322 pounds, and I realized one day that, as I got a little bit older, I believe I was around 21 at that point where I was at my peak weight, that I was, obese and I needed to fix something and I needed to make a change, and life wasn't all about, just the business. And I realized, as I got older, a little bit more mature, that if I didn't have my health, I didn't really have anything, because you can be extremely wealthy, but if you weigh 400 pounds at 50 years old and you're in a deathbed, it's not going to be really worth anything. So I need to put myself as a little bit more of a priority. So I started to, go online, figure out what it took to, lose weight, how to exercise. And I actually just learned everything on my own. I didn't actually hire a trainer or anyone to do that at that time. I just kind of went to the gym. I started dieting, and after about a year and a half, I didn't have one cheat meal, nothing. I lost 140 pounds down to 182. I did it with no drugs, no steroid, nothing like that. Obviously it would have been a lot easier to do if we had semaglutide and things like that back then, but I did it just, with just grit and diet and training. So once I lost all the weight, I naturally was just kind of surrounded by people in the gym and people who are competing. And then that whole environment led me to want to become, kind of like a personal trainer. And then I realized I didn't really like doing one-on-one sessions so much. So I ended up just becoming a coach. And now I do online coaching, and obviously I go to the competitions in person as well.
Yeah, I was going to ask, how that transition worked, right? once you were able to lose the weight, I'm sure you were able to feel a lot better. And, you know, a lot of the same attributes that we use in something like a transformation or even bodybuilding, where we got that discipline, right? You've got to be consistent. We've got to have all these same attributes that are going to help you in business and entrepreneurship. And, you know, once you got the weight off, I guess, what was the next step? And what year did you start your bikini coaching too? I know that's a huge part. That's the core of what you do today. At what moment did you know what? I think I want to start coaching athletes. So not just personal training clients, but specifically working with athletes.
Yeah. So initially, you know, I was still running my other business while I was losing the weight. And then we sold that one off, and I wanted to start something completely new. I fell out of love kind of with the other business I was doing, and, you know, it started off being something fun, and then I kind of just did it for money, and then it just wasn't passionate about it anymore. So I wanted to do something completely new that I was very passionate about, and it kind of just naturally went in this direction. So I lost all the weight. I was involved in, you know, in the gym and being around those people, and I knew I was a good entrepreneur, and I knew that I would be able to excel in any business that I decided to dive into. So my whole strategy going into this business initially was, you know, to be a coach or a trainer or something, not necessarily be a competition coach, but just be involved in the fitness industry where, you know, I'd be someone who actually went through the journey and did an extreme weight loss on my own. Because a lot of personal trainers, they've always been fit, you know, they've always kind of had that lifestyle. They're in, you know, through their upbringing, and they've always been in shape. And it's kind of, I thought my appeal would be that I, you know, actually went through the journey. I lost 140 pounds. I suffered like, you know, the people that were overweight, and I'd be able to market myself in that way. And that's exactly what I did initially. But then I started to bodybuild a little bit. I wanted to compete and stuff too. And I got pretty big. But I realized soon after, like, I had decent genetics, but especially my legs. My legs were Olympia level legs, but my upper body was, I always say I had like a bikini upper body and like a Mr. Olympia lower body. And I realized like I was coaching while I was bodybuilding. I decided to, you know, kind of coach a couple athletes, see how I liked it. And I realized like I didn't have as great of physical genetics as some of my like male athletes did. And even if I pumped myself with as many drugs as you can think of, I still would never get to that Olympia level, just because I realized how big of a genetic game it was at that stage. And, you know, I could have turned pro. I could have went that route, but I was like, I realized how much more I enjoyed helping people and coaching people than I did actually doing the bodybuilding myself. So I switched my mindset at that point. It was just around 2015. I just focused on, you know, I'm going to keep myself healthy, and I'm going to do what I love, and I'm going to coach athletes. So I had my first athlete in late 2015.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of went all in with bikini in around 2018 or so.
Okay. And it's important, right? You found your calling. And what I love about that journey is that you tried multiple things. So there's not a part of you that's going to look back and say, oh, I wish I would have tried bodybuilding myself. You tried it, right? And you were realistic, kind of, you know, reassessed the game plan and pivoted back to coaching. And the important part too, for a lot of us as trainers and coaches, is being able to relate and connect with what your athletes are going through. And, you know, whether it's a weight loss transformation that you've experienced yourself, or if it's the discipline and consistency as a high level competitor, it does help keep you grounded. And I know for myself, having been, you know, I was blessed with the opposite genetics, where I'm actually more of an ectomesomorph, right? So when I apply myself, I gain a fair amount of muscle, but if I stop doing anything, I tend to lose a lot of muscle. Mm-hmm. And so for me, the struggle was always holding and building mass. You know, I got my pro card, you know, went to the Olympia as men's physique. And then 2016 classic physique came out, crossed over, did pretty well there on the pro level for about 5 years, and actually came back last year as IFBB men's physique pro just for fun. And again, it's like every time I go through the process myself, you're able to reconnect with your athletes and remember how difficult and challenging, and the psychological, right, the mental toughness it takes to go through competition prep. James, one thing that I'd love to share with our followers is, and we touched on it a little bit, is any tips for people that are tuning in right now that are maybe either novice athletes that are thinking about competing, or more specifically, a lot of novice coaches, right? Maybe there's personal trainers that are thinking about becoming prep coaches or working with athletes. I know a lot of times that's how it starts, right? We might be experienced trainers, and you've got a friend who's thinking about competing, and you help them get ready for a show. what tips do you have for people just getting started working with athletes and trying to build their business?
So we can start off with your initial question where, if you're an athlete looking to get into competing, what should you consider and stuff. So I would definitely make fitness your lifestyle first. Make it something that you enjoy. Go through the process, dieting, training, doing all that cardio stuff. Don't think about, doing a bodybuilding show or jumping on stage without, having fitness as your main lifestyle. If you're just, not used to going to the gym and you're not used to doing your cardio and the diet and all that stuff too, it's not realistic to have the idea to jump on stage right away. You need to have a foundation first. And going through contest prep, as you mentioned, is extremely difficult. When I lost 140 pounds, I was doing 2 hours, 3 hours cardio a day, training 2 hours a day. I went all in. It's not something you need to do, but it's something that I did to achieve my goal. And it was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. Definitely. So stage needs to be secondary, and you need to develop a foundation before, thinking about going on stage. And then once you understand kind of the dieting and the training and how to push yourself, and you have a decent amount of, muscle mass, then you can consider, maybe making your next goal stepping on stage. If you're going from 0 to I want to go on stage in the next 6 months, it's not really, you're looking at a short-term goal, and it's not necessarily going to be a healthy endeavor for you. As far as the second question, sorry, go ahead.
No, I think that's exactly right. It's really focusing on those foundational habits that develop success later on, right? Versus just diving in and you've never considered, really doing a prep, and we go all in for a contest prep. I agree with you 100%. Just focus on really building those nutrition, the exercises, the getting down into those small atomic habits every day before you maybe tackle something as intense as contest prep. James, the second part of the question there is really just going back to any advice for novice coaches or trainers that are looking to become coaches, and how to maybe even start working with athletes or potentially grow or scale their business.
Yeah. So the first thing I would mention is you don't necessarily need to get on stage in order to become a coach. I don't think that's a requirement at all. Obviously, I'm proof of that myself. There's a lot of other examples too, When I first started coaching, I wanted to learn, from other coaches and my friends and stuff like that too. And I would think, who am I going to learn from? I'm going to learn from other Olympians. I'm going to learn from people who've been through the process, but I actually learned the most from people who've actually coached athletes before. So you can only have so much knowledge on, the process of competition prep. It's going to be very limited if you're just going based off of what you learned with your own journey, So I think it's a benefit if you competed before, because you've gone through the process. You understand what the athletes need to go through. But I don't think it's a requirement. I'll give you a few examples. Like Hani Rambod is not a pro. Kim Odo is not a pro. Chris Aceto is not a pro. There's an infinite amount of names that are amazing coaches that are not pros. I've never stepped on stage and I made 109 bikini pros. So that's just proof in itself. And in regard to, even other industries, like I'll give you an example, like let's say a cardiac surgeon, right? They can be able to operate on your heart and they could help you and heal you. And they've never had to go through a heart attack themselves. It's just, you can learn all the fundamental things you need to learn about something, even an example, like a marriage therapist or someone who's never been divorced, being a counselor for people who have, gone through divorce or going through divorces. Like you don't need to have done exactly what they've done to be able to be better at coaching that person or doing that thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that actually,
I do think it's a benefit, but it's not a requirement.
No, I agree 100%. And I think, everyone has got their own experiences that might contribute to them becoming successful as a coach or trainer. And, they're able to relate or connect with their athletes in different ways. With NASM specifically, we're always tying it back into evidence-based science, right? And there's really 3 major pillars of that, which are the latest and greatest scientific data and research. Then we've got our coach's experience, right? So that's going to be, everything that we've experienced as a coach. And then we're going to tie that into that 3rd pillar, which is really our client outcomes, right? If we've got outcomes, like in this case, right, we've produced 109 bikini pros, right? If we've got a repeatable, sustainable strategy and we're able to continue doing that over time, right? That's going to be one of those pillars of evidence-based research. So that's the beauty in this, is it's constantly evolving. And it's something that, again, you don't have to be an elite competitor yourself. Some people, let's take Phil Jackson, right? He happened to play basketball, but he wasn't that good, but he's definitely the GOAT, right? He could coach Michael Jordan and make him better. Kobe and make him better. So that's exactly right. And guys, if you're just joining us, this is the Peak Physique Podcast. Today, we're breaking down all kinds of fun stuff, and we've got a very special guest in the house. We've got my buddy, James Ayotte from Team Atlas. So we talked a little on, how to maybe get started if you're a coach or a trainer or even a novice athlete. And James, one thing I really want to focus on for this next section of the episode is breaking down what does that basic framework look like when we're building bikini champions. And we're going to go from the ground up, right? We're going to take somebody who is a novice athlete, maybe competing for the first time, and let's maybe high level cover what does it even look like, because there's going to be some people on the call that maybe don't even know what that path looks like to go from novice NPC to IFBB Olympian. So let's walk them through that journey, right? Just qualifications, obviously in the regional NPC level, until they're able to get to that national or that pro qualifier, get a pro card, and a lot of people, I think, once they get the pro card and they do that pro debut, sometimes it's a rude awakening that I'm a baby again, right? It's like you're one among hundreds of pros. So to really stand out as a pro and ultimately win your first pro show and make it to Olympia, that's a whole nother level. So, anything you want to talk about there, just going from novice NPC to IFBB Olympian?
Yeah, I think going back to your, one of your initial questions where, giving advice to people starting out as a coach, it's going to be fundamental that you understand the tier system and how to go from an NPC to, an IFBB Pro and then qualify to Olympian. But all the other steps that we're going to discuss too is going to be important for that question. You mentioned one thing too with the NASM thing is it's an ever evolving, sport, and it's never going to be stagnant. You got to keep learning. I think that's one of the biggest fundamental things to being a good coach. I've been doing this for 10 years now. I've never stopped learning. I never think I'm better than anyone else or know more than, know everything. So the second you become complacent and you think that you know everything and you shouldn't change strategies, then you're not going to, you're going to be surpassed by people who are younger than you, smarter than you, and willing to learn. So yeah, that's something you need to really understand is always keep learning and always listen to your athletes, because I learned some things from athletes too, even if they don't recognize it. So like, let's say go through a prep with an athlete and their body responds differently that I'm used to or that I expected, and I can kind of troubleshoot what happened there, and I could kind of understand and then maybe apply to future athletes that I deal with. So yeah, never stop learning and never think that you're too smart to, change your strategy. And you don't need to be so, you don't need to dig your heels in the sand on one set thing. You need to have you have to be open-minded and understand that things are going to change. A lot of old coaches, they kind of get pushed out of the way because they're so set in their ways. They don't want to learn. They don't want to adapt. It's worked for 15 years, but things evolve, and it's in everyday life too. So if you're just complacent with your strategies, you don't want to update your documents or update, your infrastructure of your business or, all of that stuff. I mean, you're people that are younger than you that are willing to learn and be smarter than you are going to, surpass you and take your clients. That's just, I've seen that a lot. You've seen teams or high coaches that were on top of the world, and then all of a sudden it's like you don't even talk about them anymore. But that's just that's their fault because they didn't adapt and they stayed complacent with what they were doing. So
Yep. It's you're 100% correct. It's easy to get antiquated and get left behind. It's like IT, right? I mean, the knowledge in this field specifically, because we're constantly evolving, adapting, and we're looking at even supplementation or dieting strategies. I mean, let's just look at supplements, right? Just in the last 5 years, the evolution of things like peptides and SARMs and SERMs and biohacking. There's a lot of different things that people are employing and producing results. So you definitely want to make sure that you're having that iterative process with your clients so that you're learning, to James's point, adapting, reapplying, right? And there's going to be iterations of that. And you guys know my philosophy, it's actually on my shirt, right? Ain't done yet. We're not done, right? There's still so much knowledge out there to learn. So make sure that you don't get passed up if you're a coach. But even as an athlete, you want to understand these basic things so you can make informed decisions as well. James, with that, I think let's dive into what it looks like, right? We get a new client, they apply for contest prep, and let's start from the basics. As coaches, what's the first thing that you look for when you're assessing an athlete? And, I'll kind of go through mine, but let's hear from you first. What are the first things you're looking at when you're assessing an athlete physically, or maybe it's like metabolically?
Yeah. Right before I answer that question, you touched on one thing that I thought it was, useful, but you said that, you mentioned like SARMs and peptides and all that stuff too. And it's funny because those are things that I utilize with my client, and I actually prefer over the general steroid like Anavar, Winstrol, all of those things. Mm-hmm. And it's funny because it's kind of a new thing, and it's so kind of frowned upon with old school bodybuilders or typically men who compete. So I don't think in the 10 years I've been coaching, I've ever had a new client come to me who was coached by either their boyfriend or, a bodybuilder or a guy that doesn't have a lot of experience with women, and they were taking SARMs over steroids. I don't think I've ever seen that before. Mm-hmm. And that just goes to show it's because they're not adapting and they're not learning, and they're not evolving. And, I hear sometimes, well, steroids are better than SARMs and blah, 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 blah. Everything has their use, but I think I've proven with my track record that obviously, they work. So, and I find them better in a lot of situations compared to, other PDs that are typically widely used compared to the SARMs and the protocols that I'll do. So, yeah. Yep. So your question with how do we start off? So the first thing is clients will inquire, and they'll send their photos and all the information in order for me to assess, their timeline and their goal and what they're looking to achieve. And I think the client's timeline is very important. So sometimes I'll get an inquiry where someone's like, listen, I'm competing in 8 weeks. I need to do a show in 8 weeks. My family's coming out, and they look like they're 2 years out. Like they have no muscle mass on them, and I need to lose 85 pounds. And I'm like, listen, like I have no problem. I'm willing to coach you, but I don't feel comfortable putting you on stage on that timeline because I know you're not going to be competitive in that timeline. So I think their timeline needs to be realistic. I'm not one to ever take on clients and just do things for money. I'm very passionate about what I do, and I don't put athletes on stage just to if I know that they're not going to succeed and they're not going to achieve their goal or they're going to fail. So if I were to take on that client and be like, yeah, sure, we'll put you on stage, which a lot of people will do because they're willing to pay you thousands of dollars, then the overall quality of my team would go way downhill, and that's not something I'll ever sacrifice for. I'll never sacrifice quality for even if that client was like, no problem, which I've had many times, like, okay, I'll get someone else to coach me. I said, no problem at all. Once you're done that show, come back to me and we could assess the situation again, and we can get you, on a proper off season and do things properly. I'm not going to make you lose 85 pounds in 8 weeks and get your posing in check and make you get built in muscle. It's not a realistic goal, So right. Always give clients a realistic timeline. I've never once in 10 years told someone that they won't. Like, let's say I have a client that says, hey, I want to turn pro in 12 weeks, inquiring client. And I'm like, it's impossible. It's not going to happen. You need a little bit more time, and I can get you there, but we need a little bit more time. I've never once in 10 years had a client or inquiring client prove me wrong and join someone else and actually achieve the pro card or whatever against what I suggest them to do. So I have a good track record for the way we make so many bikini pros. We're making at least 20 a year is because I could understand what the judges want and what they're looking for, and I'm able to strategize which clients in which shows, depending on their goal and their timeline, and understanding if they're ready to turn pro or not, or if they're close. I don't just throw clients on stage to throw clients on stage. It's not something I'll ever do. So that's the first thing. I got to assess their timeline, how they look, and if their goal is reasonable with their expectations. So yeah, that's definitely the first thing. Then once they're, they come on board, then there's a lot of documents and everything that we send to them, and it's a little bit of a process, but we're very, very detail oriented. And I like to, I have a rule, whenever I have to repeat myself 3 times, like 3 different people for any type of information, I just put it into a document. So then it's, it's there. And then it's, if I'm having to repeat myself so many times, that's causing like a delay in coaching, and it's wasting my time. So I put in a document, so all the information is there. It's very clear, and then I send it to the athletes, and they have all that right off the bat.
Mm-hmm. That's actually good practice. So I'm going to put the entrepreneurship cap on. What James is saying there, guys. there's really two things. When you can streamline information coming in and out of your business and streamline revenue coming in, and just money flowing through your business, you're going to be a lot more successful and efficient. And ultimately, you're going to be a better coach because it opens up more available capacity where you're not dealing with redundant type of tasks like this. And you're able to really just focus specifically on coaching. And James mentioned a few things there. I hope you guys are taking notes. You guys know that I'm a huge advocate of also listening to your body's timeline. And you're 100% right, James. You'll get those athletes that maybe aren't as familiar with the process, and they'll come to you 8 weeks out from a show. Hey, I'm doing this show. It's right next to where I live. And like you said, they're just way out. Maybe they're 24 weeks out, or they don't carry any muscle to begin with. And for us as coaches, what I try to advise our followers to do is just be genuine. So don't chase the dollars. Maybe in the beginning, you're willing to take any and everybody who knocks on your door, but all business is not good business. And ultimately, that's your reputation and your brand on stage. So now maybe you're the Hyundai of coaching, and you'll take any and everything, and you're that economic option, and you don't really care what the athletes, how they place or how they look on stage. But if you're that Mercedes-Benz, you're that Cadillac brand, you want to make sure that you are consistently producing top quality physique outcomes and giving them good experiences. So can't stress that enough.
I want to touch on that. Actually, you made a good point that I didn't consider. First of all, with the organization and the infrastructure. So you have to have good infrastructure. If you're wasting your time doing tasks that you can, give to someone else to do, let's say like inquiries or, bookkeeping or whatever. I mean, you got to, when you're limited on time, which you will be if you're a good entrepreneur, you need to delegate tasks to other people, get employees. And that's how any business runs. There's no one that makes extremely successful business on their own. So that's something you really need to consider. Another thing too, you need to be organized. I get inquiries all the time where I would say over 50% of the time, people that were with other coaches, they'll be like, yeah, it takes them 6 days to respond to my check-in, or it takes them 4 days, or even if it's like kind of top coaches, I'm like, man, these people are just not organized. You can't let the client wait for that long. I couldn't imagine being in a diet and you're like 7 weeks out and your coach takes 6 days to respond to you. You're like, I'm starving. Do I need to increase my food? Do I need to do more cardio? Like, I don't know. So I really feel like that's an important aspect. Like us within 12, 24 hours, like max, like you're getting everything that you need to know. And even I'm coaching hundreds of athletes, it doesn't matter, but that all comes with infrastructure and being organized. If you have no idea what's going on and you're just kind of doing check-ins or whatever, and you're just kind of hoping for the best, you need a good infrastructure, and everything needs to be organized with a good system. So systems are super important for successful business. The second thing you mentioned was, sorry, I forgot what the second thing you mentioned was. I kind of went off track there.
We were really talking about just, again, streamlining the business, kind of revenue and information coming in.
Oh, yeah. I remember. You mentioned one thing, like being like the Hyundai and stuff too. When you're starting out as a coach, you need to eat shit sometimes, honestly. So you're going to take athletes that you kind of don't want to take. You need to build your business. If you're just focused on, getting athletes that can win Mr. Olympia, I mean, you're never going to get anywhere. So yes, you can take athletes, for a cheaper cost if they're really on a budget once you're starting out, or you can take athletes that, maybe aren't great structurally. But I never limit. If an athlete doesn't have great genetics and they want to join my team, I have no problem taking on my team. But I mean, like you will have to coach some athletes for free when you start out, especially ones with really good genetics, because you're offering them a service, but you have no experience, and they're offering you a great physique and they're willing to work and trust you. So it's like, at the start off, you might have to coach a few athletes for free that are really good genetics, kind of get your name out there. Like, that's nothing wrong about that. At this level, I don't coach any athletes for free. But at the start, you will have to do that if you want to kind of get your name out there. If you're just expecting people to pay you when you have no experience, and they have great genetics, like why would they do that? They could just pay someone else. So I think you could be a little bit more lenient on who you take, and timelines and stuff when you're starting out. But once you start getting a name for yourself, if all your athletes look like shit and you make one pro in 8 years, I mean, that just shows that you're not great at what you do, unfortunately. So you have to really go for quality, and not necessarily quality athletes, but quality of just even your overall, how you coach and how you position athletes in shows and all of those things.
Yeah. And again, it sticks with us, right? So if we're consistently producing high quality athletes, we're going to be known for that. But if you're consistently producing athletes that are under condition or don't meet the criteria for those divisions, that's also going to stick with you. So
the best compliment I actually get a lot of times is like, James's athletes all look the same. I'm like, wow, thank you so much. That means I'm consistent, because all of their physiques are so different. But if I'm able to if I'm able to have such a consistency with my results and my athletes, and they all, different genetics, their bodies are totally different, that's great, because I have a plan that's set forth, and I could customize it for every single athlete. I can make everyone very consistent. That's how you get consistent results. If one year I make 10 pros and 1 year I make 30 and 1 year I make 2, I mean, there's no consistency anywhere. So consistency is the game if you want to stick to a business for a long time and succeed in any entrepreneurial endeavor.
Yeah, I agree. That's our reputation. That's our branding on stage. And again, that's our artistry, right? So we're literally sculpting. If you've got a framework and a recipe that works, there's no need to completely reinvent the wheel every time you take someone through a prep, right? We've got that 80% of that framework, and then maybe 25% of that is hyper specific to that individual's needs. And, just thinking through when I take an athlete in, let's start from the beginning. We'll go through probably an aesthetic, I call it a needs analysis, but an aesthetic assessment where we're looking at what divisions, and they don't always know the divisions, right? Sometimes they're unsure. Am I, especially now with fit model, we'll talk about that in a moment, but am I bikini, fit model, my wellness, am I figure, women's physique, etc. So it's like guiding them based structurally on what we feel like their genetics might present them best for, but also what they enjoy doing the most. Put them next to that Olympia champion, right? Look at the deficiencies. What are the areas we need to develop the most? Also, I would use tools like an InBody or DEXA scan to get some objective data on the skeletal muscle, right? Aesthetically, that's the main priority, but we can still look at, just from years of experience, where do we feel like all of our champions are at, with skeletal muscle, percent body fat, conditioning, and things like this. Other good assessments when you're taking those clients in would be looking at their biomarkers and overall health screenings. Clearly, whether we're natural, honestly, or enhanced, we should be looking at blood work when we first start working with somebody, but especially critical if we are using any type of enhancements or things that are, potentially impacting hormone balance, especially with our females. We're talking specific to bikini today. So looking at all those health biomarkers, and then what their past experience is. Are they new to lifting? Have they been lifting for 5 years, but they decided to compete? Have they had personal trainer or coaching in the past, and those sort of things? James, the next thing we'll dive into, as we're past assessments, we've kind of mapped out a timeline. We feel like, said client might need 20 weeks to get them ready. They're in a pretty good spot. Now, looking at their nutritional framework, let's think specific to bikini, and let's start at the top, right? Let's think about assessing things like their nutritional requirements, right? So I'm normally going to look at BMR, and then based on their activity, maybe it's their lifestyle, maybe they're a nurse and they're getting 30,000 extra steps in a day, right? Things that are going to set the total daily energy expenditure so we can really set their initial target macros.
Yeah, so typically what I would do is I would ask them what they're currently eating. If they're completely unsure and they're kind of like a newbie, then I would kind of just make a diet and go with trial and error. That's always kind of going to be the best way to do it. I could typically look at someone and be very close to knowing what their maintenance calories is just by looking at their body, based on if they're an ectomorph, mesomorph, or endomorph. And I'm pretty fairly accurate with that. And let's just say someone's like, I kind of eat whatever, and I'm just, I'm unsure what I'm currently doing. I'll kind of give them a baseline. Let's say, like, I can see that they're really an ectomorph, and they're tall and they're lanky, and they're lacking that muscle fullness, and I can see that they just burn through everything. Let's say I'll give them like a 2,000 calorie diet, and then I'll see within a couple of days, like, did your weight drop or did it skyrocket? And if it's kind of stabilized, then I'll go from there. So you can always give someone like a trial and either way, you're going to be guessing a little bit with the initial plan because you don't know their body yet, right? You don't really have any data besides what they tell you, and sometimes what they tell you is not accurate. So you need to really learn things on your own by trial and error. So I'll give them an initial diet. I'll see how their body reacts to it, and then I'll adjust right away, depending on their needs and where if I need them to gain weight or need them to lose weight, etc. So that's how I'll typically do it. I'll ask them for previous data, but a lot of time it's not accurate, honestly, with what they're actually doing. So yeah, the trial and error is always going to be the best, and quickly you can find out quickly,
Yeah, I think you're spot on there. We've got two different things. Sometimes what I'll run into is we'll calculate, or we can even direct measure on like an in-body, for example, their BMR. And then, right, we're going to estimate or calculate their total daily energy expenditure. Let's just say it comes back and says it's 2,500 calories. But then we have them do a 24-hour recall, or maybe they're tracking their calories. So it calculated at 2,500, but they tell us they're only eating 1,500 calories a day. And they've been at maintenance, right? Body weight hasn't moved for 2 months.
Something's off. Yeah.
Something's off, right? So there's been maybe a metabolic adaptation or something. And this is one of the curveballs, I think, that throws a lot of coaches off, because if we go by the theory is going to tell us, well, they're burning 2,500 calories a day. So if I feed them 2,000 calories a day, they're still at a deficit. They should lose about a pound a week. But if we were to implement that on that athlete, they'd actually gain weight, right? Because they've been at maintenance at 1,500 calories. So knowing what an athlete's been eating consistently over a period of time, if they're tracking, and then, this is where the coach's expertise, or, you got to make a judgment call. And to your point, there's a bit of trial and error where, I usually take my best educated guess based on what I calculate, based on what they're currently eating. And I try to put them at baseline initially, observe for that first week or two. Are they increasing maintenance, or are they dropping? And then we adjust up or down from there.
Exactly. Yeah. That's the best strategy. And also sometimes if let's say you want to grow a large coaching business, right? And you're doing it online, because do it in person nowadays is very tough because you need everyone local. So if you want to grow a big coaching business, you need to do it online. And a lot of times you're not going to have the tools like the InBody or the DEXA scan or whatever. So you're going to need to go off, your intuition and based off your knowledge, So like I can look at any woman and guess her weight within 3 pounds. So anyone walking in the street, whatever, just because that's what I've done. I look at females' bodies all day long, and I coach them, and I see their weight, and I see their height, and I see like the whole adaptation. So your intuition, and just kind of as you go through the process and you learn, you'll be able to make much better educated, guesses, and be able to start them off. Usually it's very rare that I'll send a diet and they lose like 10 pounds in a week, because I'm like way off. You know what I mean? Even if I have new information based off what they send me, you can typically tell.
Right. And this is where I think people sometimes don't recognize how important and beneficial data is, right? If we're new to coaching and we've coached 5 athletes, it's not enough to maybe generalize and say, okay, I'm seeing these common denominators or these common attributes. But if we've coached, 500 or 1,000 athletes, we're certainly going to see some trends there, right?
Oh, yes.
We know girls that are, roughly this height and this shape tend to, respond this way. We're going to see common denominators show up in their blood work and the way that their hormones react throughout the course of a prep. So definitely don't, underestimate how valuable the data and experience is as you guys are coaching more and more athletes.
Oh yeah. Like I'm like, obviously the only way you can be consistent in bodybuilding and making pros and Olympians is by customizing everything for each athlete, right? If I just had a blueprint and I was just like gave every athlete the same diet and the same training and the same this and that, I would not have consistent results. The consistency comes from adapting to each athlete. So that's one thing. Number 2 is it was exactly what you were saying there. It was the data. So obviously, even though every athlete is different, there's a lot of trends that you see, and that's how you know what to do in certain situations. You're able to problem solve. So let's say like for a peaking athlete, for example, right? Everyone's gonna have different needs and different requirements, but you'll be able to assess different looks and know what to do in situations based on past results that you've had to go through with other athletes that were maybe similar, at similar issues or similar strengths or flaws, and that's how you become a better coach. So it's all about gathering the data and being able to adapt and customize to each athlete. You have to be able to adapt though. If you just write, because in bodybuilding, sometimes things don't make any sense. Like I'll give you an example. Like, let's say like you have an athlete and they're, you're dieting them down. They're on like 900 calories and they're not losing weight at all. And then you give them like a refeed, and then they lose like 5 pounds after that too. Sometimes that, when their metabolism is extremely slow, there are ways that you can measure that and identify that and justify why your body would do that. But there's some things that just don't make sense when you're coaching an athlete that you need to have intuition in order to solve or fix. So it's not like an A plus B equals C situation all the time, because if it was, then you can go on ChatGPT and be like, what do I do in this situation? You know what I mean? So I think the NASM thing is actually a really good idea to partner with the IFBB and NPC. I actually messaged Tyler after he announced it, and I said that's a really good idea, because you guys did give like so much valuable information. But there's certain situations where there's not a formula where you're going to be able to implement for peaking athletes, or for dieting them down, or there's just not one set formula that you can incorporate in your coaching that's going to allow you to, because then what I could do is I literally write you a notepad. Okay, if this happens, you do this. If this happens, you do this. And it's like, it's just binary, and you don't have to adjust it. That's never a possibility in coaching, because it's different for every athlete. And honestly, every athlete has different preps too. So there's never a prep that even with one specific athlete that's going to be the same as the past prep. So even if A plus B equals C on this prep for, let's say, Ariana, it might be totally different for next prep. So it's very annoying. It's very, I'm sure you going through preps too. I'm sure not all your preps are the same.
Exactly. And
things change all the time.
For sure. And I can speak to that as both an athlete and a coach. As an athlete, I've done over 30 plus shows. I've never hit the same peak week. You're always coming into each peak a little differently, right? Maybe your conditioning is a little different. This one you're chasing fullness. This one you're chasing get a little leaner. This one your body's not responding to, your carb cycling, or your hormones are off. So 100%, you've got to be flexible. It's not a rigid thing, right? But like the NASM PBC course, for instance, what I love about it is it gives you basic framework tools and guidelines. And just like you mentioned, maybe throwing in a huge refeed or cheat meal and then dropping weight after, right? That's actually a strategy that we use a lot. And, there's different mechanisms of action that happen in the body with insulin signaling and other things going on. But it's good that you have, through experience and a good combination of formal knowledge, we're going to develop all these different tools that we might employ at different times, right? There's different dieting strategies. This female might have PCOS with insulin resistance, or hypothyroidism, or Hashimoto's, right? There's different strategies and framework we're going to employ to get that athlete conditioned versus somebody who doesn't have these conditions. So, that's the importance of making sure that your skill set is well-rounded. Also partnering with medical professionals that can help you interpret, understand, and work through or navigate issues, be it hormonally, key health indicators, just overall health. A couple other things that we would look for as coaches is making sure that we're optimizing gut health. And James, you work with primarily women as well. And I can only imagine how many times it's come across your desk, like GI distress, bloating, gut health, be it hormonal or digestional issues. So knowing how to navigate issues with the gut to overall make the prep easier, make it more enjoyable, and make your body respond better. Hydration, basic things, right? That we have to master as coaches. And, one thing I want to maybe pause on and talk about more is going to be like, common supplements that we would use to support hormones, insulin sensitivity. You and I lightly touched on like natural versus enhanced, or what I would call hybrid, which is going to be like, the biohacking, peptides, arm serum.
Oh,
so,
okay.
We get these questions all the time. So
you go to a natty show, you're like, I'm hybrid. It's fine.
Yeah, it's hard, and I always caution people when you use the word natural, like, okay, so, are you taking a fat burner, right? Where do you draw the line on natural?
I think it's any natural supplement is fine. Anything, that's supposed to be a prescription is not.
Right. And because, in theory, if you're 40 and up and you're on HRT, but you're not taking super physiological bodybuilding dosages and you're within a normal, level of your hormones, is that considered natural or enhanced? Technically,
no, it's enhanced. I mean, I would go by like the MMA standards, the UFC standards. Like UFC, you can't even take BPC or TB500 because it heals you, quicker than it's like fully natty. Like you're just there's nothing.
Yep. And so I think athletes need to fully understand what they say. You'll see it in some people's bios, and it's like, well, okay, where do we draw the line? But when we're talking specific to bikini, these are real things that, we have to address. And again, I'll even take it back to the assessment when we're first, working with an athlete or potentially working with an athlete. Honestly, it's good to be transparent at that point, right? Especially if we've decided to work with this individual, we want to make sure that they're fully disclosing and they feel comfortable disclosing in full transparency any supplementation enhancements, things that might be affecting their performance or their overall health and hormones.
It was a client that I had, and she was taking some SARMs and stuff, and her liver enzymes were like through the roof, like really, really high. And I knew she was taking SARMs and stuff too, but it didn't really make much sense. And then like I had her do blood work, and I had her do test all of her vitamins and minerals and electrolytes and everything too. And her potassium was in a range where she should have been dead and had a heart attack. Okay. And I showed it to the doctor, and she's like, immediately tell her to go to the hospital right now. She should have a heart attack. You could have died just from taking so much potassium, So that was scary. And I was like, it wasn't even PD related. Like she could have been a natural athlete. Those were natural supplements she was taking, And then she stopped I said, stop all of them. Take nothing. You're taking omega-3s, creatine, glutamine, and I even stopped her multivitamin stuff to just get everything out. And then her went way down. Her labs were perfect. I was like, we literally had all these issues from the natural supplements. It was insane. So, yeah.
Right. So, and more is not better, right? I think a lot of people have that misconception, whether we're talking about gear or we're talking about natural supplements. So that's definitely something to be mindful of. Also, one test you guys could do is the HTMA, hair tissue mineral analysis, which is going to show the compounding effects over like a 3-month span versus like a snapshot with blood work. And you can use that in addition to the blood work to make an informed decision on maybe it's a sodium imbalance, maybe there's other drivers, or in this case, they're just taking way too much of one thing. So make sure that you guys are definitely paying attention to those biomarkers when you're working with your athletes. I know we're running a little short on time, but there's a couple things I want to make sure we touch on. One question that we got, James, from Instagram actually was managing androgens for females, and I'll keep it short and sweet, is basically, how can we minimize realization and the risk? So I'll kind of lead with, it's always a risk, right? We're in bodybuilding. So anytime we're employing androgens or even SARMs to a certain degree for higher dosages, longer durations, there's always going to be an associated risk. Now, as coaches, we can stay ahead of that by understanding, proper durations, working with medical providers when necessary, right? Understanding blood work. And again, just being responsible, staying within your scope of what we're actually prescribing or recommending that an athlete takes, and understanding the mechanisms of actions and how these things work in the body. Blood work, easy to check your DHTs, your total amount of androgens with DHEAS, testosterone, and things like this, and then have a open, transparent feedback loop. To James's point, right? We need to understand everything an athlete's taking, and then also, if they're starting to experience the onset of any virilization or masculine type of effects. James, the last thing, somebody actually just chatted that one in. Do you think the bikini division is getting too muscular? We'll just say lean and hard.
If you want, I'll touch on the androgens first.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So in my experience, even if PDs are not very androgenic and their anabolic to androgen ratio, their androgen to anabolic ratio is very low, girls can still get the masculine side effects off those. So any peptide is not going to give those, even if there's a general rule where if it's helping you build muscle mass and it's a PD, it could give you androgenic side effects. Even if it says that it's not androgenic, I've seen it give androgenic side effects, except for peptides. So let's say SARMs or anabolic steroids, I believe any of them can give you androgenic side effects, even if they're not very androgenic. But it's all based on genetics, okay? Like all of it's based on genetics. So you can give like these South American girls, right? They can take like 7-8 different PDs, injectables, and have no side effects at all. No hair loss, no clit enlargement, no voice deepening, nothing of that. And then you give some girl from, that lives in like India or whatever, for example, 5 milligrams of Anavar, and they can get every side effect under the sun, So it's another kind of a trial and error situation where you start things at low dose, you get feedback from the client, seeing if they're experiencing any side effects, and then you either lower it or remove it if they do get any side effects. The way I do things, it's very rare clients get any side effects when the way I employ, PD usage. And, I never go crazy on anything too, but you can tell you're not going to become a man overnight. There's all your androgenic side effects and anything related to DHT, like the hair loss and things like that too. Like, it's going to be something gradual and something that you're able to identify pretty early on. So just make sure you're vocal with your coach and you're letting them know, if your voice is getting a little bit deeper, you have hair loss, you have clit enlargement, anything like that. If it bothers you, obviously, I think it should for most girls. And it's very easily fixable. I mean, there's nothing that's going to be long-term if you don't want it to be long-term. So, yeah.
Right.
And what was your second question? The fit model, I think bikini is perfect where it is now. It evolved very rapidly year after year up until about 2020, and it's been about steady ever since 2020. So I think they realized that they pushed it a little bit too far because they introduced the fit model division to be like bikini was in 2013 to 2015, which is like a softer, more attainable look. Now, to be a good bikini athlete, I mean, most of them are taking PDs. There's no one at the top of Olympia that's not on PDs, and that's just the name of the game. And I'm really happy that they introduced the fit model division because it's a much more of an entry division where a random girl to gym, you could entice a random girl to gym to do a competition or show them a physique of a fit model and be like, wow, I want to look like that girl. She could do a photo shoot at the beach and that looks great. A bikini girl showing now a top bikini Olympian to a normal girl to gym, it's not as enticing because they're like, oh, their shoulders are a little bit too big, their legs are too lean. Like, it's not a look where the general population would typically like or like to look like, until they get familiar with the sport and they do competitions. Like, okay, actually, I want to look like a bikini athlete. But I think the entry level division fit model is a lot more attainable. It's a lot more marketable. It's going to be great to bring a lot more to the general population. I'm very excited about that because there's not going to be really a lot or any PD usage with it too, which I really like as well.
Yeah, exactly. It breaks down a lot of those barriers to entry,
yes.
The cost of the expensive suits, right? Now they're able to do actually an off the rack suit if they chose to, so that's one thing that's broken down, a little bit more coverage on the glutes for maybe women who are not as comfortable.
That I don't like, but I think I think it should be 25%. I think 50% is too big.
I think it'll evolve.
I think it will come to 25%.
Yeah.
The feedback I'm getting from my clients and like most of the girls are saying they like 25%. I agree. But it's at 50 now. We got to respect the rules, and they'll make the decision later on when they're getting feedback. Hey, I don't like the suit cut, or they do, and maybe they might keep it. But I think it will evolve 25%. I think if they start at 25%, like they did for the initial bikini, then it would have went to a thong like it is now. So they got to start somewhere, and then it'll evolve, and it'll hopefully stick to where it should be.
Yeah, I've gotten similar feedback from most of my athletes as well, and I agree. I think it'll probably evolve over this first season or two. But it's good, it makes it a little bit more affordable, maybe more comfortable for some girls. And ultimately, it brings more sponsorships, money, and athletes and attention to our sport, which is a beautiful thing. So, guys, I know we are out of time today, but I want to make sure that you guys got some value out of this episode. I feel like, James, we could probably talk for the next 2 days. There's so many different topics.
I'm a yapper, so
we'll have to definitely pick up the conversation on your podcast soon. But guys, make sure you also check out that NASM bundle that the league is offering. We talked a lot about value add as a coaches and athletes. You can find that right on npcnewsonline.com. James, let our audience know where they can find you or, get a hold of you if they have questions.
Yeah, guys, you can find me on Instagram at Team Atlas MTL or my website, teamatlasfitness.com, or my YouTube, James Ayotte. So I appreciate you guys. It was fun, and definitely check out the NASM programs. I'm really excited that this is going to be offered to the IFBB and NPC, coaches, athletes, and everything to kind of get more knowledge. The more knowledge you have, the better. So,
yeah, we appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule, James. You and I will have to connect on so many more things, including some entrepreneurship topics soon. And guys, you know where to find me. You can find me on Instagram and YouTube at AndreAdams_official or TeamAdams_prep. And you can email me trainingbydre@gmail.com or visit the website AndreAdamsOfficial.com. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to another exciting episode, and we'll see you back soon on the Peak Physique Podcast.